welcome. We thank you so much for joining us, or for our second one. We especially thank those that have been for the first and the second. And then a special thanks to those of you that provided feedback on our last digging in on the eagles at the National Arboretum. We want to make sure that these events improve each and every time, and your feedback is so very important. So when you see the survey come in for tonight's event, please take the time to fill it out and let us know what you think about digging in and how we can make it better each time. And we'll have an announcement about a future digging in very soon as well. Okay, so I noticed some very familiar faces on the screen tonight, and it's great to see all of you again, but there were a couple of new faces too. And I wanted to make sure all of you knew about FONA and the National Arboretum. Friends of the National Arboretum, FONA, as it's known, is largely a philanthropic organization, but that supports the National Arboretum. But we also conduct some programming and offer events out of the National Arboretum as well. We've had to cut back on that a little bit over the past year, but we're paying attention to what's going on with the pandemic, and hope to offer some new events in the coming months. So please keep an eye out for emails from FONA, and make sure you keep informed. Okay, National Arboretum, as most of you I assume have been out there. It's a wonderful scientific research institution and garden collection set on 446 acres in Northeast DC. It's a wonderful place. I was actually out there today working in our Washington Youth Garden, and I would encourage all of you, it is open now, to come out and visit. I do want to let you know about some things, special things going on there right now to help us manage the traffic. We've had a lot of people out of the Arboretum lately. We do have a special traffic management plan. I know a lot of you, when you've come out in the past, have probably entered off the R Street entrance. But for right now, probably until around the end of May, we are requiring that you enter on the New York Avenue entrance. That will take you on a loop around the Arboretum. There's a one-way loop that you can park on as well, but we want to make sure that we manage the traffic and keep people safe when they visit the Arboretum. We do require masks to be worn since it's on federal property, and do what you can to social distance out of the Arboretum as well. But again, make sure when you come in that New York Avenue entrance. Normally around this time of year, we'd be celebrating our garden fair in April, and then our annual dinner under the stars in June. But as some of you are probably aware, we've had to cancel those this year, but we're trying to do our best to offer some different events in the fall to make up for those cancellations. So in the fall, you'll see some news coming soon around our bulb and succulent sale that we're going to have probably around September. So keep an eye out for that. And then we're going to do a special dinner for our donors as well in September out on the Great Meadow by the Capitol Column. So again, keep an eye out for that news. I did want to let you know we're working on a new project at the Arboretum. It's still in the formative stages, but we're looking into building a new canopy trail at the Arboretum too. We're working on that with our board and the Agricultural Research Service and the Department of Agriculture on that, but we're making some good progress. So we have to have some news on the canopy trail soon, but I wanted to let you know that's something we're working on to improve that visitor experience out of the Arboretum these days. Okay, I want to give some housekeeping issues before we get started with Mary. I want to let you know that the event is being recorded, and please keep yourself muted throughout the presentation. If you have any questions or comments, you are free to enter those in the chat, and then we will tackle those at the end of the presentation. And with that, I'd love to introduce Mary Travaglini. Mary is the organic lawn and landscape manager for the Montgomery County in Montgomery County, Maryland. She's got a background as a landscape architect and years of working on managing invasive plants and stormwater management facilities. She now assists residents and landscapers going organic on your lawn and educating the public about the county's pesticide law restricting lawn chemicals. Does great work for the county of Montgomery, and we're so happy to have her today. And with that, I will turn it over to Mary.
Thank you, Craven. Thank you, everyone, for coming tonight. And it's a beautiful night, so I appreciate you being inside on the presentation versus outside on a lovely walk or something like that. But I will try to make this as painless as possible. I appreciate everyone coming. Assume that everyone on the call probably has some lawn or cares for some lawn somewhere, and that's why you're here tonight. So we're going to go over some soil biology and soil science tonight, and we're also going to talk about top tips for organic lawn care. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and get my screen shared here so that we can get this up and get you rolling. All right. All right, so tonight we're going to be talking about healthy soils and organic lawn care. The reason this is not just about organic lawn care and is about healthy soils is that everything related to a healthy organic lawn is related to the health of your soils and not just what you do above ground. So we're going to talk a little bit, as I mentioned, about soil biology tonight and then launch into some of the tips and tools. One of the reasons that we share a lot of this information these days is not only are people interested in organic lawn care, but here in Montgomery County, Maryland, we actually have a pesticide law that passed a few years back, which bans the use of most synthetic pesticides on lawns. What is allowed is organic products, and we show some of the labeling here that you might find on organic products. For those of you looking for organic pesticides, whether they be herbicides or fungicides or insecticides, there are classifications of pesticides that are considered under the USDA laws to be organic because they're derived from organic things in our environment. So if you see a label like one of these that says either OMRI or for organic gardening, or if it has no EPA number on it and it says that it's exempt from EPA labeling, those are the products that are considered organic in the environment. So those are allowed in Montgomery County, but other synthetic pesticides, all of your glyphosate products and things like that are not allowed to be used in lawns. The reason that this really matters, and this mirrors not just what's going on in Montgomery County, but also other areas, is that 14% of the county is covered by impervious surfaces. And we focus a lot on those things when it comes to stormwater and a focus on the issues with stormwater, but 28% of our county is covered by turf grass. And that's similar in many areas. In the urban areas, there may not be quite as much turf grass and more impervious surface, but much of our environment where we have a mix of urban, suburban, and rural areas has quite a bit of turf grass and very little focus on the impact that that turf grass can have on our environment. So why is it important to go organic with our lawns? The benefits that lawns could provide increase when we go organic and have healthy soils. We want to try to get our lawns to mimic what grasslands do. Here on our planet, native grasslands store 50% more carbon per year than forests do per acres. So the deeper we can get our lawn roots, the healthier we can have our soils and store more carbon in the soils, the more we can start mimicking what those native grasslands can do to store carbon underground instead of contributing to climate change. Lawns also improve air quality. Here in Maryland, lawns trap 12 million pounds of airborne dust annually. And the nice thing is that they're doing this year round because the blades of grass are up above ground, waving in the wind year round and have all that surface area to capture airborne dust. Our trees do a lot for airborne dust while the leaves are out, but once they drop their leaves, we've got to turn to things like lawns to actually capture some of that airborne dust and move it down into the ground. Lawns can also produce oxygen. Lawns and grasslands can produce 3.5 times more oxygen than trees per acre. Again, we're talking about a really healthy, dense lawn that's managed organically in order to maximize that oxygen production. They also capture and infiltrate stormwater in urban and suburban areas, particularly, again, when the soils are really good. And they're important for erosion control in urban environments where we can't have surfaces that are other than concrete or a lawn, where we might not be able to have tall vegetation or trees because of sight lines or dense areas or places where people play and move around. Lawns play a big role in terms of erosion control. So the better we can do with our organic lawn care, the more we can actually benefit the environment. This is a teaser. I'm going to get to this at the second half of our presentation and talk about the top 10 tips for an organic lawn. But I'm actually going to start by talking about soil biology, and I'll make it relatively quick, but there is a bit of science for you tonight. This is going to take you back to high school chemistry or high school biology a little bit, but it's important to understand soil biology because that's the foundation of all life on Earth, and it's also the foundation of how we can maintain healthy lawns as well as healthy gardens. The most important thing underneath our feet is soil organisms. They really matter. They're incredibly important. Number one is they are what makes nutrients soluble for plants. They convert nutrients into forms that plants can uptake that cannot be done without soil organisms. They decompose organic matter and turn it into stable carbon underground. They are actually what creates soil secretions and glues that hold the soil together. So when you pick up a thing of soil, a good soil, and you can clump it up in your hand and have it fall through your fingers, it's because of those secretions that's holding it together. They immobilize nutrients so they don't wash out into our waterways. They actually protect plant roots from disease, and they do a lot to shape the habitat of the soil by distributing fungi in the soil and multiplying bacteria in their guts. So soil organisms are really important, and everything we want to do underground is meant to also improve our populations of soil organisms. But how do soil organisms and how does the soil work when it comes to nutrients? We need to understand how nutrients are made available to plants to understand what we're doing with our lawns. So we're going to talk a little bit about cation exchange capacity. This is your couple of slides of science here. So clay is really important in the soil. Sand and silt are actually not very important when it comes to nutrients in the soil. In fact, they have no role in nutrients in the soil, but clay is really important because this is what is electrically charged that can hold or release nutrients in the soil. So clay is minerals that are held together by electrical charges, and it has a negative charge on it. If you look at that little image there on the left of your screen, you'll see these plates of clay and these little negative symbols. Those are the clay particles. Clay has a negative charge, and many plant nutrients are positively charged, and they're what's binding to clay. So clay is very important in the soil. What's happening with the soil and the nutrients is that those nutrients are being bound to those clay particles. And talking about nutrients, the smaller the particle, the more tightly it's held. So hydrogen is really small, but only has one charge, but it's very tightly held because it's so small. The more charges a nutrient has, the more tightly it's also held. So aluminum is very big, but it has 3 charges. And so it's right behind hydrogen on how well it's tied to the soil. So as you go down what's this hierarchy of affinity, you'll start seeing that things have weaker charges or smaller particles, and it depends on how well they're held in the soil. So these nutrients are always moving on and off of the clay. There's a constant movement of cations, especially as nutrients are uptaken by plants. We also have what are called anions, and these are the negatively charged nutrients. These are mostly bound to organic matter, which is positively charged, which is why organic matter is also really important in the soil. But these are also the forms that plants can uptake it. So for those of you that ever bought or know of a fertilizer bag, you'll hear that they have nitrate or phosphate and things of that nature. Those are negatively charged. They've already been converted in a lab type environment to put them in the form that a plant can uptake. But they easily wash out of the soil, and they can only be taken up by the plant if the plant is ready to take them. So there's a problem when we put fertilizers on the ground. If we don't have a plant that's ready to take that fertilizer up, it will wash out into our waterways, which is why we have a lot of pollution in our waterways and the bay in particular. But we also have pH, which comes up a lot when people are talking about lawns. And I like to talk about pH mostly because there's a lot of myths around pH. There's often something said about the pH needs to be 6.5 to 7 in order to have a healthy lawn. But 6.5 to 7, when you look at this chart on the left here, you can see those bars, and those are the bars of nutrients, and you can see that they're wider at that pH of 6.5 to 7, which means they're more available at that pH. But that chart that's on the left there, you'll see at the top, it says it's soil with a high mineral content. When you go to the chart on the right, you'll see that it's soil with a high organic content. And when a soil has a high organic content, actually at a lower pH of a 5.5, those nutrients are more available. So the question is for things like blueberries. A lot of people hear that blueberries really want a low pH, but they actually don't want a low pH. They want organic soils because at a low pH, they can access more limited nutrients in their native soils that are highly organic. So a lot of times when people start messing with the pH in their soil, they're doing it temporarily. They're causing a swing in the nutrients, but you actually don't know. Do you have a high mineral content? Do you have a high organic content? What's your soil biology like? So messing with the pH is really problematic because of a few things. One is that pH is a measurement of hydrogen atoms in the soil, and hydrogen is not a soil nutrient. Low pH is a full saturation of hydrogen. It means there's no nutrients stuck to those soil colloids. It's all hydrogen. And a really high pH means there's no hydrogen, but it's all nutrients, and the microorganisms can't get those nutrients off. But if you look at that little illustration at the bottom, you can see that there's calcium floating out there in solution. And we've got soil that has a high pH, has got a lot of hydrogen and not a lot of nutrients on it. What happens when we dump the calcium from the limestone onto soil, we temporarily put that calcium on to knock the hydrogen off. But that hydrogen we mentioned earlier is so tightly held because it's so tiny that at the same time, we knock off all of these more loosely held nutrients, and they're now bounced off into soil solution. So what's happening is when we take something from a bag and we dump it on the soil, we really don't see what I'm showing you here in this image. We don't see that we're causing a seesaw in nutrients, and it's just going back and forth. So unless you really cannot get lawns to grow at all because the pH is so off, the things that we're going to talk about next are going to be focused on, it doesn't have to do with one number. It doesn't have to do with the pH in your soil. It has to do with a lot of other things in the soil. So we're going to jump into soil nutrients. How do we keep the soil nutrients high for grass? So grass needs a lot of different nutrients, but the NPK, which many of you have heard about, is the top 3 nutrients that grass and most plants need to grow. So we're going to go through those one by one. The first is nitrogen. That's the N on the NPK. And grass is a big nitrogen hog. It uses a lot of nitrogen. But grass clippings alone can leave behind 50 to 100% of the nitrogen that a lawn needs. So always, always, always leave your grass clippings on the lawn unless you're having a wedding in the afternoon where you need to have those grass clippings picked up. You can also get a lot of nitrogen from leaves. So leaving behind as many grass clipping or as many leaves as possible and chopping them up into the lawn in the fall is great for nitrogen as well as a lot of other things. If you need extra nitrogen, there's a lot of sources. You can buy compost, you can buy earthworm castings, which is just earthworm poop essentially. The compost and earthworm castings provide a lot of nitrogen as well as the bacteria that helps to extract it for the plants. If you're in a coastal area, seaweed is a great source. And many of us that drink coffee, what do you do with your coffee grounds? I suggest you put them on the lawn. It's a free source of nitrogen. It's a free source of carbon. And a lot of people have a lot of coffee grounds. So you can let those just dry out on the counter and then scatter them whenever you want around your lawn. You can also get corn gluten or soybean meal, alfalfa meal are good sources of nitrogen. The difficulty is that they're very hard to get in non-GMO forms for those folks that are doing true organic care. Clover plants are really important, actually. Soil or seed mixes used to contain clover before the advent of pesticides and herbicides that killed it. But clover plants in the lawn contain the bacteria that fix nitrogen from the atmosphere. And there's also some other ways that you can get nitrogen into your soil. But again, grass clippings and adding compost, having healthy soils, and adding some organic amendments will get you plenty of nitrogen. P on the NPK is the phosphorus. Most of our soils have plenty of phosphorus, but some of it is bound into rocks, and it can only be extracted by having a good source of fungi in the soil that can do that. But grass clippings, again, return a lot of phosphorus to the soil. Here in Maryland, state law limits inorganic sources to 1/2 pound of fertilizer, phosphorus fertilizer per 1,000 square feet, but we can get almost 4 times that much just from grass clippings. Leaves will also, again, supply a hefty amount of phosphorus and can be chopped up with the mower. So there's no reason we should ever need phosphorus from a bag when we have plenty of natural material right there on the lawn to provide even more phosphorus than you're allowed to put out with a bag. You can also get phosphorus from compost, and you can also increase the populations of endomycorrhizal fungi that extract phosphorus from the soil and provide it for plants. And then on the K, the top 3 again, NPK is potassium. And you can get potassium from compost. You can also, again, use kelp meal or seaweed as a great source of potassium and get micronutrients at the same time. And then wood ash from a fireplace or from an outdoor fireplace can supply potassium and micronutrients. You just have to be cautious with wood ash. If you already have a high pH, it can temporarily raise the pH in the soil. And then we need to increase our soil microorganisms while we're at it. Compost and earthworm castings and also compost tea will provide a lot of the microorganisms that you need. You can also get effective microorganisms, which are called EM. They come in a bottle and you just dilute those and put them out per the directions to make sure that they survive, but those are a great source of microorganisms. You can buy endomycorrhizal fungi that are great for soil. And then there's plenty of other things you can get out there that you can add, but even just a handful of healthy garden or forest soil mixed in with your compost or mixed out when you're aerating is a great way to start introducing some microorganisms into your soil. Let's see, now my screen is frozen. How fun. Let's try this again. Okay. All right, there we go. Microorganisms, we just talked about increasing the population, but we also have to feed them. They are big carbon hogs. They eat a lot of carbon, including eating each other as the bacteria die. They feed on each other as the protozoa eat bacteria, and so on and so forth. But we can feed them a lot through grass clippings and leaves. We can feed them with compost. In coastal areas, we can feed them with dry seaweed. We can add worm castings, which again are just worm poop, and they have stable carbon as well. You can add sawdust or wood chips or newspaper to your compost. Straw is a great source of carbon. A lot of folks in the fall will have decorative hay bales out on their porch and don't know what to do with them when they're done. A great thing is just to take that, scatter it across your lawn, run the lawnmower over it to chop it up in small pieces, and the bacteria will have a feast on that carbon. And you can also get carbon out there through blackstrap molasses. Lawns also need micronutrients. You can get micronutrients in many different forms. Typically, micronutrients are needed in larger boosts when the lawn has had, say, a traumatic winter or had a flooding event or had a big party out there and got a lot of trampling. But you can get these through many sources. Sea minerals are great because they contain all the elements on the periodic chart and many minerals. Wood ash tea, which is basically making a compost tea out of wood ash, can supply some of your heavy metals. Blackstrap molasses contains a lot of trace elements and can be put in the compost or compost tea. And then of course, compost can have a lot of micronutrients, which will vary depending what's put into the compost pile. For those of you that might need calcium, we're going to talk about how to read a soil test a little bit coming up, but oyster shells and wood ash are great sources of calcium if you do need calcium, and I prefer to use these because they're not mined. Here in the Chesapeake Bay region, we have a lot of oyster shells that we can use, and again, wood ash just from the fireplace can be a great source of calcium. And long awaited, now that we're done with a lot of the science and the amendments, is the top 10 tips for how to care for a lawn organically. These are the 10 tips that I'm going to go through tonight. It won't take long to get through them, and then we'll have plenty of time for questions if people have specific questions about anything I'm talking about tonight. So the first is to stop using synthetic chemicals. I think that was pretty obvious from some of the information I shared before, but there's a lot of reasons why fertilizers and pesticides can be difficult. One thing with synthetic fertilizers is that, again, they only feed the plant, and many will wash off if the plants are not ready to absorb them. They also have a high embodied energy, which means it took a lot of energy to make them into what you're getting in the bag. So in terms of climate change and impact on the planet, it's taking a lot to get that bag of fertilizer to you. They can attract pests by causing weak growth in plants and also cause weaker plants to be presented to you. And then you wonder why they're not as strong and can't handle difficult environmental situations. Synthetic pesticides, on the other hand, also can harm humans, wildlife, pollinators, and plants. So the better we can aim to have a dense lawn and avoid pesticides, the better off we're all going to be. So most importantly, probably, is that we need to start tolerating some weeds and change our expectations about what a lawn is. So what a lawn is not a golf course. Lawns are very different than a playing surface. They are meant to be a variety of plants. Our main goal with a lawn is that we don't have a lot of bare spots when other plants go dormant. So if you have some broadleaf weeds in there, if you've got some other grasses in there, as long as when they go dormant, we don't have big patches of bare ground, in my mind, that is a healthy lawn. We want to have a nice, dense, very green surface, but having some extra plants in there will provide diversity for pollinators. It will reduce the impact use of pesticides. Many species like clover, as mentioned, will benefit the soil, and quite a few are edible to humans and wildlife. One thing that lawns do not do very well is provide good habitat or pollinator habitat. So the more we can actually increase the diversity in our lawns, the more they can benefit our environment. Mowing is really important. We want to raise our mower blades as high as possible. Taller grass actually shades out weeds. It will capture more sun to turn into energy and increase stronger and deeper roots. And they'll actually transpire less water by keeping the ground cool. One of the reasons that places like golf courses need to water every single day is because they're cutting so low and there's a lot of solar radiation that reaches the ground. When that solar radiation reaches the ground, it's drying it out. It's drying out the plant roots. It's stressing it out more, and they are going to be more vulnerable to weeds and also give more sunlight for weed seeds to grow. So keeping your grass tall, it's not going to grow any faster. It grows at the same rate. Just keep those mower blades up high and leave the grass clippings behind. Again, you also want to cut with really sharp blades. We should be sharpening our blades every 10 to 12 hours of use, or as soon as we start seeing the tips of the blades get frayed. The reason we want sharp blades is we want those wounds to heal quickly. If you have a shredded blade, there's more surface area that the plant needs to heal. There's more surface area that diseases can attack, and there's more surface area for that plant to lose moisture through those frayed edges. So keeping those blades really nice and sharp is great. Some people will have two blades so that one gets dull, they put the other one on, and then when they're both dull, they can take them to be sharpened at the same time. Many of our farmers markets around here, a lot of times blade sharpeners come around, but you can also go to a fair number of hardware stores and other places to get them sharpened. Leaving all grass clippings, we mentioned this earlier, it's really important. Huge source of nitrogen. It's a major source of carbon-based food for microorganisms and is that actual carbon sink by getting carbon back into the ground. You also want to chop up and mulch in as many leaves as possible. Sweep some aside to save for habitat for pollinators. You know, sweep some into the garden and into your woodlands if you have them, and then leave some on the lawn and chop up any extras that you have. Taking a soil sample is really important. It only costs between about $10 and $15 to take a soil sample, but you can diagnose a lot of problems in your lawns if you take a soil sample. These will measure levels of nutrients, it will measure your organic content, it will make sure that laws are being followed, like in Maryland where we have phosphorus laws, and can help diagnose pest problems that you might have. Reading a soil sample, we have a lot of information on our webpage, but I'll just point up a couple things. One is that in Maryland, we actually have a phosphorus law that if we are in the high to or optimum to excessive range, we cannot add anything that has phosphorus. So you want to look at those phosphorus ranges. You can see on this, the second bar down, you can see the phosphorus on this soil level is actually in a range where we can add compost and other things with phosphorus in them without worrying about that. But also if you see in that little yellow box at the bottom, I circled the organic matter. And this particular lawn had a pretty decent amount of organic matter, but ideally we're looking for over 5% organic matter in order to have a healthy soil. We also want to look at the calcium to magnesium ratio. When you look at the calcium to magnesium ratio, you want to have about 5 to 8 parts calcium, which is 60 to 85%, to 1 part magnesium, which is 10 to 13%. And combined, we want that calcium and magnesium to be less than 80% of that total cation exchange capacity that's on your soil sample. If you look at the box in yellow here that I circled, you can see the calcium saturation is 65 and the magnesium is 20. And if you look at those numbers I told you up above, the calcium's in a good range, but the magnesium is way too high. And this particular soil was very compacted, and the compaction actually has to do with the magnesium and too much magnesium in the soil. And this might be a situation where you might need one of those organic sources of calcium, or you might need some more organic matter added into the soil to balance that out. Aeration is really important. If you were to take a screwdriver out to your soil tomorrow and it's difficult to push it in, you probably have compacted soils. Core aeration looks like this image on the right here. It looks like little goose poop on the lawn. The machine goes over, it pulls these plugs out of the soil. It provides air and for the microorganisms to breathe. It opens up the water for soil to fall in, and it opens up areas for compost to mix into the soil profile. So this is a great thing to do when you're adding compost or seed to your lawn, is to core aerate at the same time. Overseeding is really critical. Lawns get tired, they wear out. Grass blades live about an average of 7 years. And so they're dying all the time and they don't always refresh themselves. We want to have a lawn that has up to 6,000 blades of grass in a square foot. That's a lot of grass, but the denser the grass is, the better we can shade out and fight weeds. If the grass roots and the grass blades are dense, those weed seeds don't have anywhere to germinate or anywhere to get into the soil. So overseeding will rejuvenate the aging grass. You can fill in spots where weeds would invade if you're doing spot seeding. The best time of year to overseed is in the fall. The second best time of year to overseed is in the winter time, doing what's called a dormant overseeding. And the third best time of year is in the spring. So if you're still sort of at the edge of getting a little bit late for spring seeding to be most ideal, but you can still do spring seeding. And then the least favorite time of year to overseed is in the summer because it requires a lot of water. The plants can be very stressed and they may not have as much vigor going into the colder months. So again, fall, then winter, then spring, and then spot seed throughout the summer as needed. Adding carbon-based materials to your lawn is really important. The carbon buffers the pH, it increases the cation exchange for nutrients, it increases the sorts of carbon for microorganisms to feed on, it supplies the micronutrients that it needs, and helps to fight disease. If you have a really large area that's difficult to add things like compost tea or compost, you can try compost tea, which is basically just a brew made out of compost, and it's adding all the microorganisms, it's multiplying them as it brews, and then you put that out in a wet form, and it's a lot less labor intensive and doesn't have any phosphorus concerns if you have a high amount of phosphorus already on the lawn. So look into compost tea. We've got some recipes out there on our website, and there's lots of resources on compost tea online as well. Limiting water is really important. We only want to water a lawn during establishment or a severe drought. When you are watering, you want to water deeply, which is an inch or more. If you do frequent shallow watering, like just putting the sprinklers on and letting them go every day for a little bit, you can actually encourage weeds which take advantage of that shallow profile of water, whereas we want the grass roots to be strong and go down for water. So we want to have a nice, deep watering as necessary. Lawns typically need rest, especially our fescue lawns that go dormant in the summer. Just let them go dormant. We don't have to force them to grow by keeping them wet all the time. They don't actually mind that rest. They can focus on increasing the root structure underground. And then lastly, if you have a lot of problems, particular pest problems or difficulty getting your lawn to grow, you want to consult with a professional. They're not all alike. You want to seek out folks that have organic knowledge, be a source of wisdom yourself so you can have an educated conversation with them. Look for reputable suppliers. Don't just go Googling on the internet. Seek out local experts who know things rather than just looking up everybody's opinion online. And of course, always demand quality from your professionals as well. So again, that's just in summary, the top 10 tips for an organic lawn there, from starting by just eliminating chemicals and tolerating some weeds all the way down to adding overseeding and consulting with professionals. I'm going to switch over to one screen here that has an email you can use for me. If you have specific questions after this, you can use this askdep@montgomerycountymd.gov and ask any questions there. And then we have a really extensive website. So everything I've talked about tonight, I've talked really quickly and skimmed over, but we have it in extreme detail at our montgomerycountymd.gov/lawns. And you can go there and get tons of information, how to take the soil test, how to read a soil test, how to overseed, all sorts of things. And then we also have a blog site that you can get more information on some specific things as well. But with that, I'm going to stop my screen sharing and we will let you ask questions.
All right, Mary, thank you so much. A lot of great information there, and reminder that to everyone that we are recording this. So if you didn't catch everything, you can go back and do some research on the recording as well. All right, we have some questions here. Mary, the first one was sent in advance, and it's, what is the best way to deal with a huge 70% infestation of crabgrass in a backyard lawn?
Well, I would say if somebody has 70% of anything besides turf grass, its chances are that you might have to start anew. What a professional will probably do is will smother that with black plastic and use that. The smothering with the black plastic will kill all of the plants and will kill all of the seeds, and you'll start from scratch. And then you'll come in and you'll do your compost and your seed and make a nice, dense, healthy lawn. If you have 70% crabgrass, stilt grass, creeping Charlie, whatever it might be, there are times where it's just not worth multi-years of fighting that, and it's better probably to start from scratch.
Thank you for that. Would throwing eggshells on your lawn be helpful in adding lime to soil? It's organic.
It is organic. I would say that just tossing them out, you might notice them for a while because it's going to take a while for them to crush up. Some people will actually take the eggshells and they'll have an old blender and they'll blend them up with the blender that you don't like to actually use because it will dull it really quickly with the eggshells. But folks will actually add them to their compost or crush them up first and add them to their compost. But if you're just going to scatter it on the lawn directly, you'll probably want to shred them up in a blender of some sort to get them fine, because otherwise it's not going to get into the soil.
Thank you for that. This was something I thought about too. How do you apply blackstrap molasses?
Usually people will put that they'll put a little in their compost, but typically people will make it in their compost tea. If you're just going to put it out, you would just dilute it in a watering can and then, or an end hose sprinkler if you have one of those things that you can put it in and dilute it. But blackstrap molasses, typically, I would say most people add it through the use of compost tea.
Okay. Mary, you have a request to re-show your top 10. I think that was obviously a popular
sure.
popular topic. So if you could re-share that, that would be great.
Mm-hmm.
And then next question is, what is the length of time a sprinkler system should run?
So that's a great question. Every sprinkler system is different, but as I mentioned, when you do water, you want to have an inch or more of water to go in the ground. And the best way to know that you got an inch out there is to just put out a bowl or a cup. And when that fills up to an inch, you can turn the sprinkler off.
Okay. Our home has a fairly small lawn that definitely needs help. My question is, where do we start when the lawn is about 30% grass and the rest is dandelions, clover, violets, chickweed, and wild strawberry?
It's almost the same question someone asked earlier, which is it's 70% not grass. So I would say, again, if it's a small lawn, your best bet is to first take a soil sample so you can get to that soil, maybe consider smothering it with the black plastic and then starting from scratch. So, get that soil sample so you understand what you need to add. Usually when you have a lot of weeds like that, the chances are that your soil's not in the best condition. So you might have to do a decent aeration of that soil and then put down your compost and your seed and things of that nature.
Okay. Next question is, when you smother the grass to kill unwanted weeds, do you kill the beneficial microorganisms as well?
You don't. As far as I understand, they're pretty adaptable, and they will move down in the soil column. In fact, I had an interesting experience. My cousin rescues turtles and usually does a lot of things to get earthworms whenever she comes to visit my family's property. And she asked me to bring some, and it was kind of cold out. But I had seen earthworms, but it'd gotten cold. And so I went out digging for earthworms, and it really never occurred to me how deep they go. And they were literally down in that hard, what I consider clay soil that's really hard to dig in. And they just moved down there. They were completely out of sight, but I could see their holes and where they went. But a lot of soil microorganisms will move. Some of them might die, but the populations are huge, and they'll adapt. They move to the side, they move down, and you should be okay with that.
Okay. Got some good questions coming in here. All right. How do you get rid of persistent grassy weeds like nimblewill or zipper grass?
Those are very difficult. I can't say that I have an easy answer to that, besides suggesting that you do a little bit of hand pulling every day and a lot of overseeding. Again, they're going to favor compacted soils, soils with poor nutrients, lawns that have not had consistent care over the years for overseeding and good soil. So I'd take a soil sample. Again, I would check the compaction on your soil. I would start overseeding extensively while focusing on, again, it's gonna take a little bit of persistence to work that out. It's not gonna happen overnight.
Okay, thank you. When would be a good time of year to start over with the black plastic?
You could definitely do that right now. It's not too late to start a new lawn. It might take a lot more, a little bit more water to get it established, but probably if you really want to start from scratch and have it be most ideal, I would do that at the end of the summer, right before fall, since fall is the best time to establish a new lawn or to overseed. If you're willing to wait and plan ahead, you'll have your greatest success by doing the kill in the late summer and then that fall compost and seed to get it restarted.
Okay. Next question is how to get rid of Asiatic beetles.
So beetles are a great question. Again, nutrients are going to play a big role in beetles, and surprisingly a really healthy lawn, which is, again, you can have up to 6,000 blades of grass in a square foot. If you can get to that really healthy lawn, you can actually have a fair number of grubs in the soil. I think you can have like 5 to 10 grubs per square foot in a healthy lawn and not even know that they're there, because there's just plenty of stuff for them to feed on, and the roots are deep, and there's just enough roots to share with everybody. But there are resources on, I think we have the resources on our website. If not, email me. But if you go to our website, we are changing the website a little bit to make it more accessible, but I mentioned our website right there that's on the screen that says montgomerycountymd.gov/lawns. If you put another /law, if you go to that page on the very bottom right, there's a resources tab, and under that we have organic alternatives to common pesticides, and there's quite a bit of listed on there for grubs, but many grubs will respond pretty well to certain biologic treatments. There are BTI treatments and nematodes and other things that will help quite a bit with grub infestations.
Okay. Do you have suggestions for getting grass to grow on a dry, somewhat shady slope? I would love to know this one too.
Yeah, it depends on the size of your dry, shady slope, but there's a couple things you can do to improve that shade situation. One of them is to just limb up your trees a little bit. So if you really want to have grass and it's competing with the shade that trees provide, just taking a couple of those lower limbs up will make a difference in terms of getting a little more sun in there. The dryness is a little more challenging, I would say, with that. Again, take a soil sample to start, but you might want to talk with a landscape supplier. There are some places, I don't know, it depends where you live in the county. We have some landscape suppliers. These are not your hardware stores or your big box stores or even your small nurseries. Look up landscape suppliers that tend to do things for the companies that work out there, and many of them will actually be able to work with you on seed varieties and seed mixes for whether it's full sun, full shade, dry, wet, etc.
Okay. Can you recommend a place to get your soil sample tested?
There are a lot of places. Again, on our website, if you go to that website, there is a whole thing on soil testing, and there are links there on regional and local labs that you can get your soil tested.
Okay. After we seeded our lawn and scattered straw over the seed, the straw seeded itself. What do we do about it?
So you might have had hay instead of seed or straw. Usually the straw should have been a weed-free straw. What do you do about it? Chances are that was an annual plant that was seeding, or it was a weed that was in there. And that's a bit of a bummer. But if it was just like an annual ryegrass type of thing, you can just kind of mow that out and it'll die. But if it was an annual grass, I would say, again, focus on the other things you do for weeds, which is try to pull out as much as possible and aggressively overseed with what you do want there.
Okay. What are good lawn alternatives? Are we able to plant clover easily?
Yeah, there are actually people who make entirely what are called micro clover lawns. I don't know a ton about them. There are some landscape designers and landscape architects that might know a little bit more about putting them in. They still do require some maintenance. They can still get weeds in them, but they're relatively low maintenance. They typically need full sun. But the microclover is just a lower growing species of clover. There are also some no-mow mixes that some of the seed companies out there are selling that are varieties, particularly of native plants. They say no-mow, they still need some mowing. And then you can also do plantings of sedges and other low growing plants as well.
All right. We are in a woodland setting. Is it possible to grow grass in all the shade? Is tall fescue the best for that?
Most of I don't know my grass varieties that much, but most fescue is going to either need sun or shade and sun. If you're in a full shade, you might have to look for varieties of grasses that are more adaptable to dense shade. But again, woodlands and lawns are just not two words that really go together. If you're in, some Victorian England property, that has these scattered trees and sheep under them, that kind of woodland environment can have lawns, but unfortunately lawns and woodlands, they just don't go well together. They fight for nutrients. They both want the same thing, and the grass wants sun and the trees like to make shade. So I would say that you can try, but you might be fighting it pretty hard for a while.
Any recommendations on how to get core aeration service without all the rest of the lawn care package from professional companies?
I would just, if they don't want to do it, call another company and ask them if they'll do it for you. I would find it surprising that a lawn care company wouldn't do singular services for you, except that they may end up charging more if it's not part of the package. But there should be plenty of companies out there willing to do it. You can also, those machines can be rented. They're just really hard to move because they're heavy. So you can also see whether or not, like a neighborhood handyman or handywoman that is able to move that in and out of their truck and bring it over and push it around for you could do it.
Okay. Cicada holes in the soil will help with soil aeration. Yes?
Say that again?
Cicada holes in the soil will help with soil aeration?
Sure, they will. Yeah. Somebody was asking recently about cicadas and are they going to damage the grass? And the answer is no, they're not going to damage the grass. But I was like, but they'll probably help to aerate.
Can you core aerate more than once a year?
You absolutely can core aerate as much as you want. Typically when they core aerate, they should be going over the lawn multiple times, like not just one time, at least 2 times, maybe up to 4 times across the lawn. It should be really riddled with holes when that goes in, but you can absolutely do it more than once a year. It will actually, somebody was asking about the grubs earlier, and core aeration is great for killing grubs because it literally just chops those buggers up. So yeah, you can absolutely core aerate more than once a year. I would say that if you're core aerating for multiple years, like let's say you're in year 4 or 5 and you're still core aerating because of compacted soils, you have some nutrient problems you need to address. It's not just about the core aeration. You also need to improve those soil health.
Okay. Are you familiar with leaf grow? Is it a good compost for the lawn?
It is, yeah, I'm familiar with it because it's actually Montgomery County and Prince George's counties municipal leaf waste becomes leaf grow. So I'm relatively familiar with it. And yes, it is a good compost for the lawn.
Okay. How about moss for a shady area? Is it easy to grow?
That's going to depend. Yes and no. I'm not that familiar with mosses, but it depends. There's lots of stuff out there you can look up on how to grow a moss garden or a moss lawn and encourage it. Moss, just like grass, might be a little bit particular about the soil moisture and the pH and things of that nature. But yeah, absolutely, you could increase the moss population.
Okay, and this is the last question. I love this. Is 9 out of 10 good enough? I.e., it may be difficult to accept weeds as part of the lawn.
Yeah, it's good enough, and you can certainly eliminate them. I just say, as long as you're not using pesticides to do it. Ideally, if you can fight the in my world, yes, a lawn looks just as good when there's no weeds. But the way to achieve that is to have a dense lawn that fights them using all of these other practices, and more than just top 10. I mean, I just gave these top 10, right? But absolutely, you don't have to tolerate any weeds, but don't be discriminatory of your neighbor, please, if they are tolerating weeds.
There you go. Well, I appreciate the lightning round of questions there. Good job by the group getting them all in there. I think we answered all of them, and I appreciate Mary, your willingness to answer them all. So
Of
thank you
course,
very
and
much.
like I said, if people have questions, you can send an email to this Ask the EP email. I encourage you to go to our website because there's a lot of great information there, and you can spend a lot of hours perusing more details on there.
Okay. All right. Well, again, many thanks to Mary. I hope everyone will give her a little brief round of applause here. Wonderful of you to come on and join us this evening. We really do appreciate it. And I appreciate everybody attending too. There's actually a question, I guess, for me here. Has the Arboretum been overrun since the article in the Post? Certainly not overrun, but we, again, have put that traffic management plan in place that requires you to go one way around the Arboretum, which to me is a nice little tour of the place. So come on out and make sure you come in the New York Avenue entrance. And again, pay attention to those signs around parking and direction, and you'll be just fine. But yes, the Washington Post article has been great for the Arboretum, and we appreciate the publicity as well. Okay, well, we're going to wrap it up here. Again, thanks to everyone for participating. I thought it was a great evening. I learned a lot, and just a reminder that this has been recorded, and we will be sending out the recording link to everyone, so you can go back and check it out if you've got additional questions. Keep an eye out for future digging in episodes. Hopefully we'll come up with one to send out very soon. And to stay up to date on FONA and the Arboretum on a regular basis, if you have not signed up for our FONA field notes, please do so. It's a great weekly newsletter that you can learn a lot about the Arboretum and many other things going on around DC as well. All right, so as I mentioned at the beginning, we're going to send out a survey too, and we would greatly appreciate your feedback. We want to make sure that each and every one that we do of digging in is better than the last. So we require your feedback to do that. So again, thanks to everyone. Thank you especially to Mary for her great presentation and answering all our questions. And we hope to see you again soon.